In today's video, we're going to be implementing QR code and keyboard tracking capabilities by using the latest Meta Mixed Reality Utility Kit package. I will also show you the differences in tracking latency between QR code and keyboard, as well as how to retrieve the payload data from a QR code. Lastly, we're going to look at how to get the bounding area for each trackable and build a 3D visualizer. Well, let's jump into my computer and start working on it. So let's go ahead and go into Window, and then we're gonna go into Package Manager. And then when you open this up, you're gonna get basically all the packages within your project, but we're gonna go into My Assets, and I'm gonna install MRUK, which I see right here, but if you don't see it, you need to add it from the Unity Asset Store, and just make sure that you're using the latest version as I indicated earlier, and then just click on Install. So it looks like this is now installed. You can see here that it says Remove, and we should be good to go. So I'm gonna go ahead and close out of this. So you're gonna see that we have Project Setup Tool issues, and we're gonna be going into that in just a minute. For now, let's just leave it like that. Go into File, and then we're gonna go into Build Profiles. And what I wanna do here is first, I'm gonna go into my player settings. And a couple of things that I need to do is I'm gonna install my XR plugin management. So just click on Install. I believe the Project Setup Tool will do this for you, or will try to do this for you, but I like to do it so that I can show you exactly what kind of issues or things we need to fix. And this will give you a better understanding of what we need. So this right here will allow you to basically install different plugins. In the past, we had the Oculus plugin, and now the recommendation is to use OpenXR. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna go ahead and enable OpenXR on the standalone runtime. The reason for this is if you want to run this with the MetaLink functionality, then you can have the standalone version ready to go. I'm going to be focusing on the Android part, and that's because that's where we're gonna be deploying to. So once you have that, we should be getting a pop-up here in just a second. And let's just ignore these for now, go back into this, and then enable the Meta XR feature group. I'll show you what that is in just a minute. And then enable OpenXR for the Meta Quest or Android version, and then just click on this. So now what I'm gonna do though is I'm gonna go into my OpenXR here, and these are the settings for the additional settings for the Meta Quest and Android platform. So everything in here should be good to go. We're not using additional features, so I'm just gonna use basically the core features of XR with OpenXR. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a new profile. So add the Oculus Touch controller profile, and then we're gonna go back into the standalone version and then also do the same thing. So what I'm gonna do is let's go ahead and just fix everything. Just trust me that everything is gonna work just fine. I have tested this multiple times, and when you do this, you're gonna get basically a list of items that were fixed. And then let's do the exact same thing. You're gonna see here Android API level must be at least 32, and all of these items were things that you had to do manually before. So it's really cool that we can now use this tool to do that. And I think everything should be now green. Okay, so I think we're good in there. And then what I'm gonna do is we now have this really cool Meta Quest platform. And it's very similar to this one, except it has more, basically, I don't know exactly what it has, but I do know that it has a specific optimizations for MetaQuest. So if it's available there, I would recommend to use that instead of the Android platform. And then I think we should be good here. Just click on Switch. All right, so it looks like we're good to go here. I'm gonna go ahead and remove that global volume. And I'm also going to go ahead and rename this to be something like MRUK Trackables. And we can just say something like that that represents what we're doing. Then let's go into our building blocks here, and I'm gonna go ahead and make this a little smaller so that you guys can see me as well here on the webcam. And what I'm gonna do is I need to add a pass-through building block. That way we can see the physical environment when we're running this on the Quest. Therefore, if we're scanning a QR code or a keyboard, that's going to be visible in the field of view. And then just click on that. And then we're also going to go into Scene here and add an effect mesh. This is so that MRUK basically comes in. And if you click on it, you're gonna see that MRUK is one of the dependencies. So we can also use the effect mesh to detect the walls, the grounds, basically the scene model that was generated through the scene setup process. So what I'm going to do though is let's go back in here and just click on plus symbol, and that's going to add the dependencies necessary. You can see here MR utility kit was added. It's a dependency. Well, the camera rig is a dependency, so it added that automatically for us. So I think we should be good here. So what I'm going to do is now we need to enable features that are going to allow us to basically detect QR codes and also keyboards, right? So the first thing that I need to do though is we're going to go down here to MR utility kit. You're going to see MR UK. So these are things that I covered before in the channel, and I won't cover today, but what you need to do is expand this tracker configuration and then make sure that you enable the keyboard tracking and also the QR code tracking. If you only want to do one or the other one, just enable the one that you need. And then I think that should be good to go. So then go into camera rig, and because QR codes is an experimental flag, we need to, well, not an experimental flag, an experimental feature, we need to make sure that this is enabled. If you go back here into general, you're gonna see that now we have anchor support, which is enabled, and then scene support is also required. That was also one of the different requirements that we needed. So what I'm gonna do though is I'm gonna go back here and then add a git URL. And this is gonna become the learnxr.core, the git. Again, this is not required, but I do recommend it if you wanna follow along with what I'm doing. And then just click on install. It's gonna be pretty lightweight. There is not a lot going on in there. So now what I need to do though is I'm gonna create a new script. So go into assets and then create. And then I'm gonna create a new folder and then just call it scripts. I like to keep things clean, so let's go ahead and keep all the different scripts under that folder. And then for the name of the script, I'm gonna say this is gonna be a trackables manager. And you can call this anything you like. There's really not a perfect name. This is just something that I like to reference and have things named correctly, right, when you're developing, so that it makes more sense in your head. And then I'm gonna go ahead and add it here. I'm gonna say trackables manager, and there's really no implementation just yet, but we'll have some implementation in just a minute. And then just go ahead and double click it to open it. Add a serializable field. It's gonna be private. And then we'll just say it's gonna be a gem object. And the first thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna need a trackable object, right? Like an instance of an object that we can display when we track a QR code or when we track an actual keyboard. So what I'm gonna say is this is gonna be track object, and then we can call it prefab. Just go ahead and add a semicolon here at the end. And then I'm gonna add two different methods that are going to allow us to basically get the actual trackable that was detected back. So that's gonna be called on, it's gonna be on trackable added. It's gonna be the first one, and then we're gonna be bringing MRUK trackable, and it's gonna add a new import here. So that's where the library that we added was gonna come in handy. And then this is gonna be just a trackable. Let's go ahead and add our curly brace here. And then just because I want to start simple, let's go ahead and just add debug.log. That way you don't have to use the class, the implementation, the features that I have on my learnxr package. You can just keep these as vanilla as you can. And then this AI is suggesting trackable added. We can just go ahead and do that. But what I'm gonna do though is I'm gonna say trackable added, and then what is the trackable type that was added? So instead of saying this, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say trackable type, and then this is gonna be the type, and then we're gonna have either keyboard or QR code, and then we can say added, just so that it's more, I don't know, English friendly. And then what I'm gonna do though is I'm gonna go ahead and instantiate, type this again, instantiate, and what I'm gonna instantiate is going to be the actual prefab that I have above it. So it's gonna say, you know what, I want to instantiate that, but where do I want to put it, right? I'm going to put it right as a child of the trackable item that I'm tracking. That way it's going to be basically right at that position. And then if we move that trackable object, then the instantiated object is going to move with it. So what I'm going to do, just to keep this thing simple, I'm going to say on trackable remove. And the reason why we need this is because the system is going to automatically call the untrackable remove when the item is no longer being tracked. And that happens with a keyboard, right? Like if you have a keyboard that is display and then it's not display anymore, then that's going to remove that object. That way we can keep things clean. And then what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna say, in this case, it's gonna be remove. And then we can just go ahead and remove the actual object that we just instantiated. So to do that, I'm gonna call into destroy, and then we're gonna say trackable, and then just go ahead and remove the game object that was associated with the actual trackable. Just make sure that you do trackable and not transform. Otherwise, it's going to remove the existing object. All right, guys, so if we go back into Unity and go into a MAR utility kit, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and assign the two methods that we just added. Just go ahead and drag and drop the trackable manager to each one of these, and it's gonna be for times when trackable is added, and this one is going to be when trackables are removed. So the system is gonna call into this, and then we're gonna be basically implementing our logic. The next thing that you can do though is you could create a new, game object if you wanted to. Doesn't really need to be anything fancy, and then just go ahead and make it a prefab, and then just assign it to this track object prefab. But I'm gonna do something a little bit fancier, and let me make this a little smaller so the gizmos are not gigantic. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go into my Learn XR core, and I have a really cool axis that I normally use, so you can see here. And I like this because that way we know the directions of the trackable components. So what I'm gonna do though is I'm gonna go into my MR utility kit here, and then just go ahead and drag this and drop this. That way, this is gonna be what we're going to be instantiating when this is tracked. And then the last thing, looks like we have a couple of issues here with the project setup tool because we added new building blocks. Just go ahead and hit apply on everything here, and then we should be good to go. You're gonna see here that it's gonna prompt us to use spatial data because we're using MRUK. Let's go ahead and select allow. And you can see that right away, the keyboard here in front of me got detected. And it is pretty good though, like it's pretty fast. And what I'm gonna do though is I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can cover it. And looks like that's going to, yeah. And what I'm gonna do is I wanna put this one in front of me just to see if this one gets tracked. And we'll just give it a minute here. And you can see as I rotate the keyboard, the actual handle is also rotating. And if we go back into Unity, here, let me go ahead and close out of this. I'm gonna search for trackable. Oh, there we go. So you can see that the trackable type keyboard was added. I'm gonna go ahead and remove it out of my field of view. You can see that the actual log entry for remove just came up, and that's basically what I expect. You can see now that the actual keyboard was added. So what I'm gonna do though is I want to, so right now I have this one here, and I'm gonna try to see if we can actually, there we go, if we can track the QR code. And QR code is a little bit slower. And you notice if I move the page, it's really not as smooth as the keyboard. And I think that's just because this is the first version. Let's go ahead and add a new canvas. And this one I'm gonna call it tracker info. So I think this looks good. And what I'll do though is I'm going to also make it a prefab. So let's go ahead and drag it and drop it into a prefabs folder. So just go ahead and create a prefabs folder, double click it, and then just drag it and drop it into that, and then everything should be correct. So now we can go ahead and delete it. Okay, so now that we have that though, we need to basically add it to our object whenever the QR code is detected. So to do that, we're gonna have to add additional coding to our trackables manager. All right, so what we need to do here is I'm gonna make another serializable field. I'm gonna say this is private. We can say it's gonna be a game object here as well. And then this one, I'm gonna call it maybe track object. And then in this case, it's gonna be the information, right? So we can say this is gonna be the information prefab. And you can name it anything that makes sense. Tracker info prefab, I think it's going to be better. It's gonna be shorter. So let's just name it that way. Then I'm gonna add a couple of things in here. So I'm gonna say it's gonna be the instance, and I want to put this into a variable. So I'm gonna say track object instance, and then we'll just do equal in here. So now what I can do though is this is gonna do exactly what we were doing before, but we need to check to make sure this is a QR code. And if it is, we're gonna be instantiating the track info prefab. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say if, and then we can say trackable And then there's going to be a trackable type in here that we can check. We can say, okay, is it a QR code? Is it a keyboard? I'm going to say if it's a QR code, and make sure that I do have the payload information. So what I can do here is I can say trackable, and you can say, in this case, there's going to be a payload. So it's going to be a payload string, or you can actually pull the bytes. So I'm going to say, as long as this is not equal to null, then I know that there is information in the actual QR code. So what I'm going to do is we can say, okay, now that I have the actual marker payload string, let's make sure that we pull it out. And when we pull it out, we're going to be setting it to the text. So to do that, we're going to say var, and then we're going to say track object info equal, and then we're going to be instantiate, and what we're going to be instantiating is going to be our track info prefab. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter here so that you can see everything correctly. And then what we can do here is we can say, well, track object info, and then I'm going to get the actual Text Mesh Pro UGUI that is inside of these components. So I'm going to say get component in children, and we can just use the generic here, and then Text Mesh Pro GUI is going to be the type. So let's go ahead and hit enter, and then we can just get the text into the text property. So I'm going to say, well, yeah, grab the marker payload string and then set it to that. So instead of doing this though, I'm going to add a little more information. So I'm going to use my interpolation here. And then I think everything else in here looks good. So basically what we had before, we just added a track info prefab. We're making sure that this is a QR code. And if it is a QR code, then we're also going to make sure that the QR code payload string has information. And if so, we're going to be instantiating that component, making it a child of our original object. In our case, it's going to be the axis. And then we're going to be grabbing the text of our track object info and making sure that the value of it is going to have the QR code payload. So now we need to go ahead and associate it in Unity. All right, so now what we need to do though is if we go into our MR utility kit and basically associate the track info prefab so that we can see the QR code information. So what I'm going to do here is I'll just drag and drop this component. I already have my quest plugged in, so we can just go ahead and go into build profiles and then just do a brand new build. Go ahead and grab one of these QR codes and put it in front of me. As you can see that now we're getting this is a test QR code payload for MRUK trackable demo. And I did that on purpose when I generated the QR code. Let's go ahead and try this on the other one and see, there we go. So I'm gonna separate it maybe a little bit more. That way we can read the entire payload on the other one. You can see new meta MR utility kit features available. All right, guys, so that was super, super cool. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how we can capture the bounds either for the keyboard or for the QR code, which means that we're going to be getting the area of the detected object. And you can use that for like if you wanted to open a hole through the pass-through camera, basically if you're in VR and you want to see your keyboard, or if you want to track it for another reason, then you can do that. On the QR code, you can also do the same thing. We can get the bounds of the QR code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it very simple. We're going to do basically create a new 3D object, and it's going to be just a cube, but I'm going to call it bounds. Let's go ahead and place it right at 0 of everything. And then I'm going to make it very, very small. So this one we can say, let's constrain basically all the axes. And then I'm going to say this is going to be 0.01. That way it's not super, super big. We're going to be resizing this anyways, but for now, just keep it as this size. And then let's create a new material. This one's going to be just red. And then I'll just drag it and drop it into here. And then we can just make it red here. Just make it red. And then we don't need to add any smoothness. And I'm going to make it transparent. And then perhaps this one we can do something like that. It doesn't need to be super, super cool. And we can just remove the shadows and we don't need any lighting. So something like that so that we can see the bounds, and then drag it and drop it into our prefab here, which is going to be our prefabs folder, which is going to be where that is located. And then we can just go ahead and now remove it. So now what we need to do though is we need to go ahead and go into my IDE, and then we're going to be adding that prefab as well. All right, I'm going to go ahead and add a new serializable field. Go ahead and say private. It's also going to be a game object. This one I'm going to say track bounds prefab. That way it's basically named correctly as the ones above it. And let's add a new variable, track bounds instance. And yes, we can go ahead and accept what AI is telling us to use, except that the parent is going to be the track object instance. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter there. And then I also need another variable to store the size of the actual bounding area. So I'm going to say it's going to be bounds. Let's call it bounds area rec. And then we're going to be pulling these from the trackable. There's going to be a plain rec option in here that we can pull from. So what I'll do here is we have our track bounds instance, and then we can access its transform. And then we can say local scale. It's going to be, and AI is trying to tell us what we need to set it to. I think that looks good, except I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter here so that things are properly sized. And then we can say this is going to be 0.01 so that it's not too large. And yep, so it looks like that is correct. And then the position of it, we can also change it. So I'm going to say tracker bounds instance, and then we can access the transform, and then also the local position. So I'm going to say, yeah, give me a vector 3. And then in this case, I'm going to be using the bounding area rec. And the position of X is going to be the center of the rec. So I'm going to say center and then X. And then everything else in here should be okay. So go into MR utility kit, and you're going to see that we have these track bounds prefab that we just added. So I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop this component in here. Let's see if we can track the QR code. Just going to go ahead and move it. And there we go. So it is sized exactly based on the QR code. So if I move it around, you can see that things are just sized correctly. So what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and look at the larger version of the QR code. And now the bounding area was instantiated, right? All right, so we have the bound sized correctly when it comes to a QR code. But if we're dealing with a keyboard, we need to do something a little bit different. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say trackable, and then I'm going to check for the trackable type. If it is a keyboard, then we're going to be doing something a little bit different. So I still need to access these two. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste them in here, except the local position, I'm just going to set it to be, in this case, I'm going to set it to be 0. And we can just go ahead and remove that. And then the local scale is going to be a little bit different than what we have in here. We're going to get that information from the trackable. And if you look in here, we're going to have a volume bounds, and there's going to be a value. So the way that we're going to get this is going to be from the actual size. So we can just pull in the size of that. This is pretty smooth though when it comes to tracking the keyboard. For whatever reason, it's a lot faster than QR code detection, but it is sized correctly, right? You can see the bounds of the instantiated object match properly. So one cool thing that I can do though is this one is getting tracked. And then now if you look at my QR code here, we have the payload showing correctly. We have the bounds showing correctly. Thank you so much everyone for watching today. And I haven't been creating as many videos as I used to, but I plan to change that starting now. Comment below if you have additional questions, and like and subscribe to stay up to date on new content. Happy Excel coding, everyone.